Due to the nature of this video, spoilers will be contained throughout. The game also starts with a disclaimer that the themes include depression, anxiety, and contain flashing lights, which could present issues for persons who experience photosensitive epilepsy as a forewarning. Anyways, our amnesiac and high school aged protagonist is Atma. The game mostly takes place in a quaint town in Indonesia. The word Atma means soul in Indonesian, and it appears to me that he is a character representative of somebody who had passed in the author's life, based on the dedication in the end credits of the game. It appears that Atma is Nirmala's imaginary friend. Nirmala appears to be roughly a 12-year-old girl who enjoys writing, but there are times where the game tries to trick you into thinking that Atma may be an actual person. I honestly think that the game is literally telling you that he was at some point as essential and nebulous as a soul for the author. The best way to describe this game, if you can even call it that, it's kind of more of a visual novel, or perhaps even an interactive comic strip, kind of akin to David Cage's Quantic Dream games, such as Heavy Rain, but on more of a shoestring budget. Most of the game fosters Atma and Raya, who appears to be the same age as him, as well as Nirmala, through a series of events with the help of a handy-dandy magical red notebook, which gives Atma the power to dive into other people's dreams. Kind of like the movie Inception. This is mostly used to help them with various issues. This could be things like stifled creativity or helping them to realize their dreams. But they're often sometimes even used to manipulate the persons affected to progress the plot as well. Most uses of the magical red book are seemingly innocent activities, but it doesn't really always turn out that way. The game appears to have a morality system depicted in most puzzles by a yellow flower intertwined with a darker colored flower. And when you space dive into someone, the goal is to solve a puzzle in such a way that you make the flower bloom. However, most of the puzzles are mundane fetch quests, quizzes, or even worse, at one point in the game, a series of math equations. But if you're looking for gameplay, there's certainly nothing compelling here. In the prologue, Atma is Nirmala's co-writer for a fairy tale. She asks Atma to go to her home to grab a magic wand, as Nirmala is afraid of her father being home. The father is painted as verbally and physically abusive to Nirmala and her mother, and once he fetches the item, on his way back it starts to rain, and Atma becomes concerned that this is somehow a bad omen. Atma finds Nirmala clinging onto a floating object in the river, a river that he told her earlier in the game not to cross, as it is obviously dangerous to do so, and paths also exist around it on solid ground nearby, so it seems kind of silly that the kid basically disobeyed this kind of advice. But anyway, Atma tries to use the magic wand and the red notebook as kind of an implement to drag her onto his side, because it appears that he's unable to swim as well. However, the game kind of cuts out of the prologue, and it appears that Atma has drowned, and the fate of Nirmala is largely left to your imagination. In Chapter 1, you wake up seemingly from a bad dream as Atma at your desk in high school, next to your girlfriend Raya. Together, you devise an epic bucket list and decide to skip school. The events on the bucket list for me feel more like a collect-a-thon, and they're not really age-appropriate for high schoolers. Anyhow, Raya doesn't help you very much with the bucket list due to her declining health, which appears to be a direct result of her using dark magic from an evil flower. As part of the bucket list in Chapter 1, Raya will have you build the stray cat that she found a house, and after that you decide to go to a movie together. After the movie, Raya transports us magically to a place called Cat Paradise, where we can miraculously now hear the cats speak to us in English. Atma space dives into one of the cats, which appears to be glitched, and there'll be more information on that later. And when he returns, the cats are upset with us for seemingly no reason. Atma deduces that the power of the space dive might have caused the cats to be hostile against them. And throughout the cutscene, we see that the cats get more and more angry with us, and Raya is forced to use her magic to send us back to the movie theater, which is now in a similar form of chaos. People are now acting like hostile cats all over the movie theater, and Atma space dives into several people to escape. Outside, Raya collapses, and it appears as though there is a crack in the sky. In Chapter 2, a new character named Eric is introduced. He is the leader of a biker gang. He appears to be in love with Raya as well, and is deeply jealous of Atma. We spend the vast majority of our time in this chapter making the cake for Raya on the bucket list. And in order to get that cake, we space dive into a baker who seemingly hates baking, and essentially on this day has quit working at the bakery owned by their grandfather in order to pursue their dream of being a Chinese food chef. Atma realizes that this is a really not so great thing to do, but he does it anyway, which for me is one of the actions that reinforces that he's an imaginary friend and not a real person. We get our cake, and Eric runs over Admiral, which is the cat we made the shelter for in Chapter 1. Him and his gang of bullies beat us unconscious and steal the cake we worked so hard to make to offer as an apology to Raya for hitting the cat. Eric becomes increasingly violent, and with the help of his motorcycle gang, we find ourselves outnumbered and do a space dive into Eric. Here we free Eric's inner child from a cage, which helps Atma to combat his inner demons of feeling guilt for killing the cat and also being in love with Raya. However, unlike everyone we have space dived before, Eric stays hostile after our manipulation outside of the dream sequence, and Raya uses her power on Eric to destroy him, which also subsequently erases more people's memories of him in our next chapter. Afterwards, the sky cracks yet again. In Chapter 3, we find a girl outside of our school named Lulu, and she's noticing that the world has become a much more strange place lately. Atma explains to her that the people are glitching without quite knowing what that means himself. They both decide to embark on a journey to find Raya, who is missing from school. They find out that she asked permission to leave school to fulfill some duties as a committee chair to throw a school festival. As they try to leave the school, they're stopped by a teacher who oversees the festival committee, and the teacher has been glitched by Raya into thinking that he is his own father, a military man who disapproved of him becoming a teacher in the first place. We space dive into him to return him to normal via a series of mock courtroom events similar to what you might see in Danganronpa. This yields us information that Raya is looking for fireworks for the festival, part of the bucket list, and the teacher was glitched because he wasn't going to let her leave in the middle of a school day. Lulu remembers that she has an adult friend named Madame Poopsa that used to work for a company which produced fireworks, and so we seek this person out next, only to find that she's gone insane and presumably burned down the local community center. We find out that she was also glitched by Raya because she no longer worked for the company which made the fireworks. Raya then asked if she can make the fireworks or teach her how to do so, and she declines. After another Danganronpa-style court battle, we prove that Madame Poopsa didn't actually start the fire at the community center. We also learn from her that she suggested to Raya to ask Eric's father, who's the owner of the general goods store, for the fireworks and follow the breadcrumb trail further. Anyhow, we meet up with Eric's father, who has forgotten him and is highly glitched. Lulu brings up his child and he goes mad and attacks her. We space dive into Lulu as she starts to disappear, seemingly because Raya is using her magic in order to take large parts of Lulu's experiences and make them her own. And then Lulu is transformed with rage into a swan monster that then seeks out Raya. Raya decides to kill the monster that Lulu has become, and Atma is finding this understandably appalling. Atma tries to space dive into Raya unsuccessfully, and she uses her magic powers to send a meteor through the cracked sky. Raya steals the red magic book, and we are awakened by Marin in Chapter 4. The sky is literally falling and the town is shrouded in mist. Raya is nowhere to be found. We see our doppelganger spying on us, and Marin wakes Atma up and takes him back to the base camp. There she hands over the magic wand that we unsuccessfully used in Chapter 2 to pull Nirmala out of the river. She teaches us how to use the wand to break through rifts in the heavily damaged world in order to get to the school where Marin believes Raya to be hiding. Multiple side stories conclude as we help the chef that made the cake in Chapter 2 realize their dream of cooking Chinese food. We help the Doomsayer realize the importance of his family, and we help convince a sensei who has glitched to help us beat up some kids that are preventing us from getting into the school. We also later learn that the reason the sensei gave up was due to his heart problems, so it feels kind of bad to have forced him back into fighting. We get to the school and the game goes into exposition mode and explains that Marin used to be Nirmala's best friend. Marin started attending some after-school activities to better herself, and Nirmala viewed it as abandonment of her only friend. However, Marin views Nirmala, who is increasingly leaving her out of the co-writing activities they did together, in favor of spending time with Atma, her imaginary friend, as the one who is doing the wrong. Marin says that she tried to research Atma at great length and determined that he wasn't a real person. It is then discovered that Nirmala and Raya are two parts of the same whole, with Nirmala being sort of an abandoned inner child trapped on Earth with the magic of her own imagination, while Raya is basically an adult form of Nirmala with the psyche of a child and the power to create most anything in dreams. Raya decides to abandon Nirmala due to the death of Atma, which is more likely caused by research on behalf of Marin than actually being a literal sense of death. This is because Nirmala wasn't ready to leave her childhood behind and imaginary friend during a time where she felt that her only friend was leaving her behind. We learn that Nirmala was a bullied kid with her head in the clouds and socially awkward due to her problems at home. Raya wanted to be sort of an amalgamation of people that Nirmala looked up to, and used her magic to accomplish this. The people who had parts of themselves stolen away in the dream world essentially glitch and become monster versions of themselves. It is also divulged that if Raya and Nirmala do not become one again, they both will die. It's heavily inferred that manipulating people around Raya into doing things they wouldn't have ordinarily done causes them to glitch. I look at it this way: the people underneath the magic spell are still there with their own conflicting desires and wants being manipulated by an outside source that they do not understand and cannot fight against. If they fight too hard, they become a monster. I feel like this is a direct parallel to societal pressure to make something of yourself and find a prestigious career and to conform to society at large. We all have that inner kid inside who's dreaming, but when dreams are crushed by reality over and over again, we become and metamorphosize into an adult. Chapter 5 is going to essentially be a boss fight between Raya, who is the creator of this dream world, and Atma. Raya tries again and again to either destroy her creation or convince him to wait for the apocalypse. Atma, however, never gives up and shepherds Raya through the void back to Nirmala. For me, the void is everything in between Nirmala's 12-year-old self and Raya's 17-year-old cusp of adulthood, as viewed through the lens, of course, of a 12-year-old. The message here is that we all have losses. The larger message here is that we all need to learn how to cope, and we all have different coping strategies. We can't simply abscond from our life with a cute imaginative story from our childhood. Santa might be dead, maybe even God is dead, but best real and imaginary friends change as you also change, evolving into your adulthood. Failing to adapt has real-world consequences in the form of losing or pushing friends and family away. Adolescence is a gap between childhood and adulthood where psychologically we become less introspective. We learn about our place in the world as a whole, and we slowly learn what steps it takes to be the best version of ourselves. All the while, society, friends, and family will have doubts about the moves that you make to get to the place where you're trying to go. Psychologically, it's easier to keep people in boxes rather than giving them the room and encouragement that they need to grow. The game ends with you taking 2 walks. One final walk with Atma, figuratively kissing him and your childhood goodbye. And one more walk after you've healed from the traumatic incident where you almost drowned. You're now an adult, moving to a new town with your mom, who's fresh out of a divorce with the abusive father, and you're saying farewell to places and persons that you both love and hate, but have ultimately decided to, at the end, take an optimistic approach to the future. So, for the rest of the game, I'm going to introduce a new series of videos that I'm going to be doing moving forward. I'm going to call it 777 Reviews. I'm going to try to keep it down to 7 minutes based off of 7 criteria, and those criteria are going to be weighted into 7 points. So the gameplay is going to be 2.5 points of the 7, and some of the ideas that I threw on the rubric are: does the gameplay match the narrative's needs? Is it fun to play? Beyond the gameplay, are there complex or interesting systems to tweak your characters outside of just simple equipment or stat gains from level ups? Are there interesting puzzles or any other standout mechanics that engage the player outside of just, the normal gameplay? And is there an adaptability over time of the gameplay or difficulty to ramp up or down as the player becomes more skilled and or levels up, sort of a situation? So for music, that's going to get a half point of 7. And some notes I put down on my rubric is that the music needs to be appropriate for the themes and tone. And the ultimate, the thing that'll get it a full half point here for me is, would I put this music in my car and listen to it on a road trip? As for the next section, we're going to call that story and characters, and I give that a 1.5 total. Some of my notes are going to be the who, what, where, why, and when, and how all make sense. There's an appropriate setting. There's context of time. Are the actions appropriate based on the story? Some other things I put in here are going to be, does the character motivations make sense with the context of the story? And are they in line with who that character is portrayed as? I have penalties for trying to use too many characters or having little justification to add additional persons into the game, whether those be playable characters or NPCs. I put another note is that believable enemies should be pulling at the motivations of the characters to justify putting themselves into the situations of danger that the main character usually finds themselves in. So from there, I go off into art and visuals. I just say, do they make thematic or emotional sense where and when they're utilized? And is it so good that it can stand alone outside the context of its original structure, this being a video game, obviously. The next point of contention I have is originality. Is it striving to build upon or make better any existing form of storytelling or gameplay, and does it feel unique when compared against other games in its genre? Essentially, does it have any groundbreaking story or characters or gameplay devices or plot? So it's kind of all over the place there. Anyhow, the next point I have is immersion. I put, did I lose track of time? Even better, did I lose sense of self, or did I question who I am based on these characters' actions? Did I lose touch with reality or my surroundings? Did I feel immersed, basically? And then replayability, I have as a half point there. I put a quarter point if I'd play it once further, and then a half point if I'd play it more than once. Alright, so now I'm going to get into the justification for the points that I awarded the game. So for me, the gameplay was very boring. Your only job is to avoid minor hazards and solve minor puzzles. If you've ever played a game with too many QuickTime events, or one of the Quantic Dream games, and you combine this in together to make a 10-hour journey of mostly walking around, then you'll know that, at least for me, there's nothing compelling here gameplay-wise. It's a visual novel. It's a niche undertaking of someone telling a story that could perhaps be better told by turning it into a video game. Honestly, for me, if this game had competent voice actors, and if it was turned into a more on-the-rails experience with less walking around and less collecting a lot of various nonsense, then I think it would have been better. It would have been shorter, it would have higher replayability, and it would have ramped up the emotional impact of the scenes. The music and sound effects are great. The only part where the music didn't get to me was when I was lost or doing a puzzle that I needed a little bit of extra help with. I found it to get repetitive in those scenarios, but I didn't think it was enough to dock any points from it. So for the gameplay, I gave it a half point. Music, I gave it a half point. Anyhow, the story and characters. So for me, Amnesiac main characters are overdone. High school as a setting is overdone. Magical girls are overdone. Using a fairy tale to weave elements of psychology together to shepherd a depressed and anxious person with trauma towards a brighter future helps to keep these stale elements periodically interesting, but it's mostly just a story written with the express goal to make you feel emotional. Your time is better spent speaking to an actual mental health professional or trusted friends in a way to better yourself. The plot points for me felt inferable by a toddler who's seen at least 2 cliche animes. I found it annoying that part of the story was also locked behind the Platinum Trophy, which would, in most cases, require an additional playthrough. So I didn't give it a lot of points here. I gave it a 0.5 out of 1.5. The sprite art I thought was beautiful. There were some great one-shots of vertical movements happening in the credits and in the beginning of the game. It uses great colors, and those are symbolic of the mood, so I think it did a really great job there. However, I feel like sprite art is really more aimed at a more adult audience, so it kind of loses its nostalgia and impact when you look at it from that perspective. So for me, it was damn near perfect, but the low budget and the nostalgia kind of creeping, for me, I gave it a 0.25 out of 5. So we get into kind of the characters a little bit more. Our main character is created out of thin air as kind of like a perfect boyfriend to Raya, who is like personified depression and anxiety. So for me, there were points where it did not make sense for Atma to keep pursuing Raya to help her, outside of him being created as this perfect person for her. I wouldn't see that the motivation of him as a normal person outside of that would have been enough for him to constantly try to insert himself into this girl's life. Like just look back on your own experiences in high school. Realistically, are you gonna throw yourself at somebody who's distant and keeping away from you in high school that you're dating? I mean, eventually that's gonna get old, so for me that didn't work very well. Um, as far as the originality goes, it's pretty niche, being a visual novel. I think they've kind of been overdone recently. I think they all kind of have boring gameplay. Some of them have unique stories, but it's a game. Like, make an anime, make a manga, write a book. There's other ways to do this, I think, that are better. Like, if your audience has their own imagination to draw off of, that story could mean more to them outside of you dictating the visuals of it. So, for me, that doesn't completely work either. I give it a zero point 0.5 out of 1 just because I do feel like it tried to add some gameplay elements to visual novel genre, which oftentimes doesn't have a lot of interesting stuff going on there. The only game I think I would give a 1 out of 1 to on this would be like Danganronpa, for instance. Anyways, as far as immersion goes, there were points of immersion for me, but most of them were I was sucked out of it by hours of walking around and collecting nonsense, so it loses some points there. I gave it a 0.5. As for the replayability, the whole game is on YouTube. I would rather pick and choose my favorite moments of the game than replay it outright. Once you beat this game once, I was expecting some kind of like a chapter select so I could go back and get the literally 2 things that I missed. And because that doesn't exist, I was unable to get the entire story, even through 2 playthroughs. And on the second playthrough, I was excruciatingly like looking for everything, and I still missed the exact same 2 cats. So it leads me to believe that there might be some kind of issue with the game where the 2 animals or whatever are lost or not showing up correctly in the code. So maybe the game needs to get patched, or it needs to have implementation of a character select. Sorry, not character, but like chapter select to make it better. So in conclusion, is $20 worth 10 hours of your time in this game, where 5 hours of the content is going to be you walking around lost, solving puzzles, or trying to collect some nonsense with very little fun gameplay? If you're like me and put a lot of emphasis on gameplay, I would say wait for a sale if you're intrigued by the music and the cool art. But if gameplay isn't a huge selling point for you, then I think you're in for a great time here. That being said, I have a feeling it won't take long for this game to go on sale, or to either be free on, like PlayStation Plus or Xbox Live or Epic. And I think that'll be a really good thing that'll expose it to a wider audience. But for me, some of the things that it was missing is I really wish it would have explored Indonesian culture and heritage more than it did. I wish it added more gameplay elements. I wish it could have offered multiple endings. That's a huge missed opportunity here. Like, you could have had some dark endings. You could have had some positive ones. Another huge missed opportunity for me was they could have explored Nirmala in real life. Like, they could have had her going to therapy, or having, like a pediatric dose of Xanax, or moving into like the more grittier, hard reality of her life during that point in time. I think if they made it more of a duology of reality versus fantasy, it could have ultimately been an extremely impressive end product. All in all, I do hope to see more from this studio and its writers. Anybody who contributed to this game from an art or music or story perspective, I think you did a great job, and I think that there's more that you can build off of in the future. But for this offering as a whole, for me, it has a final score of 3.25 out of 7. Anyways, I know the video cycled to repeat itself near the end, but thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.